Theme 47: The English Industrial Revolution: Its Influence as a Model for Historical Transformation, Social and Political Changes Through the Literature of the Time. Charles Dickens. Index. 1. Introduction. 2. Relation with other themes. 3. Current legislation. 4. Historical background. 5. Definition of the Industrial Revolution. 6. Reasons and factors. 7. Transformation of society. 8. New legislation. 9. Influences on 19th century literature. Disraeli, Kingsley, and Elizabeth Gaskell. 10. Charles Dickens. Life, Works, and Style. 11. Conclusion applicable to language teaching. 12. Relevant bibliography. The theme I have chosen to write about is number 47, which deals with the English Industrial Revolution, its influence as a model for historical transformation, social and political changes through the literature of the time, and Charles Dickens. In the first place, I will talk about the reasons why the Industrial Revolution happened and the factors that brought about this change. Following this, I will go on to mention several important literary figures of the time, whose works reflected the social and political changes that the country was undergoing. I will then go on to examine in more detail the life, works, and style of one of the most famous Victorian novelists, Charles Dickens. I will finish with a conclusion related to some thoughts on how best to deal with these historical and literary aspects in our secondary school classes. This theme is directly related to number 50, which deals with the Victorian novel. The Modified Organic Law of Education, the LOMLOE, came into force in 2021 and has now been introduced in secondary education. The law deals comprehensively with the most suitable type of methodology to be implemented in our secondary school classes. The official curriculum of the Autonomous Community of Madrid contains detailed information about the introduction of culture points related to history and literature during the different stages of compulsory secondary education and bachillerato. All of this is established and supported by the Council of Europe in the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. In the first place, I will deal with the historical background to this important period. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain in the latter part of the 18th century and soon spread to the rest of Europe and its colonies. Within a century, it had transformed both life and society. When we talk about an industrial revolution, we refer to the change from a basically rural agricultural society to one dominated by industry and machines. There are several reasons why the first country to make this transition was Great Britain. First and foremost, Britain had a plentiful supply of natural resources. The relatively small size of the country also meant that it was easy to transport goods. Finally, Britain's geographical position gave it extremely easy access to markets and suppliers overseas. There were many factors which influenced the Industrial Revolution. Among them, we can mention the fact that there had been a steady growth in population since the middle of the 18th century. Many people moved out of the rural areas into the new, rapidly expanding cities and urban areas of London, the Northwest, and the Midlands. The increasing demand for items such as coal, iron, and textiles gave rise to many changes and improvements in the techniques used in their production. Steam pumps and steam engines were invented, as were textile machines such as the spinning jenny. This rapid development in technology meant an enormous increase in the amount of goods traffic. Canals were built throughout the length and breadth of Great Britain, but it was the invention of the railway in the early part of the 19th century which was to prove the most significant technical innovation. As a consequence of all this, Great Britain became the first truly industrial nation in the world, with more people employed in factories than on the land. Trade expanded enormously, especially with the growth of the British Empire, but the increasing wealth that this brought with it was not evenly distributed throughout the population. True, there were many individuals who rose to positions of wealth and influence, but much of the working class population of Great Britain had to endure a miserable life in the overcrowded slums of the big cities and the new urban areas. Here, often in unhealthy conditions, they worked long hours for low wages. Many women and children also found themselves compelled to work. At the same time, a great variety of intermediary classes was created, especially a new middle class of merchants and shopkeepers. During During the course of the 19th century, much new legislation was introduced, notably reform bills in Parliament and the Factory Acts, which imposed new safety regulations, limited working hours, and restricted child labor. In short, the industrial changes paved the way for political and social changes in Great Britain. These changes inspired much of the literature of the 19th century. Many of the manufacturing towns of the north of England inspired novelists such as Elizabeth Gaskell to portray vivid examples of poverty and injustice. Gaskell's novels include the well-known Mary Barton, set in the industrial northwest of England in the 1830s. She wrote a novel based on her own observation of the poor and uneducated factory workers of Manchester. In another of her novels, North and South, Gaskell compares what she calls the satanic males of the industrial north with the leisured life of London society and the rural south. Charles Kingsley was another novelist of the time who dealt with themes like social injustices. Nowhere is this clearer than in his novel Alton Locke, which reflects the social and political turbulence of the time through the story of a tailor's apprentice working in squalid conditions and his attempts to bring about social reform through his poetry. Benjamin Disraeli, on the other hand, wrote mainly about political reform. Indeed, he eventually became prime minister. His most famous works include a trilogy of his novels dealing respectively with the political, social, and religious problems of the time. They are The New Generation, which looks at the political ideas of the aristocratic hero of the book, The Two Nations, the second book of the trilogy, containing Disraeli's famous observation that England consisted of two nations, the rich and the poor. The final book, The New Crusade, centers more upon religious issues. However, if we are dealing with the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, one name in literature stands out above all others: Charles Dickens. His childhood was not the best, particularly after his father was imprisoned for debt, forcing the young Dickens to find work in a notorious blacking factory in North London. At the age of 15, he started work for a law firm, rising swiftly from office boy to junior reporter. Soon, he was helping his uncle as a parliamentary journalist and went on to work on the Morning Chronicle. His literary work began with contributions to the monthly magazine. From his journalistic experiences came his first work, Sketches by Boz, a collection of essays, caricatures, and stories of everyday life in London. He followed this with his first serious work, The Pickwick Papers, which elevated him to a position of prestige in the literary world. Oliver Twist is a damning attack on workhouse conditions and the slums of London. His next novel, Nicholas Nickleby, was published in 20 monthly installments and exposes the terrible conditions in a private school for unwanted boys. Other important works of this first period include The Old Curiosity Shop and Barnaby Rudge. Dickens traveled to America to promote his work, and later he lived for a short period in Italy, producing two more works of note, Martin Chuzzlewit and A Christmas Carol. Upon his return to London, he experimented with his first-person narration in David Copperfield, making much use of his own childhood experiences. Perhaps his most famous novel, Hard Times, was a scathing attack on capitalist society and the sordid industrial life it nurtured. He wrote a historical romance about the French Revolution, a tale of two cities, before returning to social conditions in Great Britain with great expectations. Through his literary career, Dickens paid a great deal of attention to detail in his works. He is almost able to bring the novel to life with his vivid descriptions of rooms or secret scenes. Likewise, he had the amazing quality of being able to produce true-to-life characters, which accounted for his great popularity. He was, indeed, one of the great novelists of his generation. To conclude, it is easy to see how the great changes brought about both in politics and society by the Industrial Revolution were used by the novelists of the 19th century. They showed us in great detail how Great Britain went in a short period of time from being a society largely dependent on agriculture to one which would lead the world in technology for the following century and a half. We could easily make use of both the historical period and the literature of the time in our classes. As far as the Industrial Revolution is concerned, it would be interesting to relate the changes that the society of the time underwent to modern-day changes, especially those reflected by mass immigration. The vast number of literary productions from this period that have since been made into television series or films would also give us a great deal of suitable material to use in class. The bibliography I have used for the information in this theme has basically been a critical History of English Literature by David Dakes, the Norton Anthology of English Literature by various authors, and The Industrial Revolution by James and Elizabeth Outman. I hope you agree with me that my theme has covered all the necessary points and that it has demonstrated the importance of dealing with this important historical and literary period in the English language, using up-to-date methodological principles, something which can only be of benefit to our students.